rise and fall of nations and industries, revolutions and uprisings, Barings Bank persevered. Founded in 1762, Barings Bank was an English institution associated with class, longevity and strength, so much so that even the Queen of England had an account with them. Then, in 1995, this grand banking legacy was destroyed, brought down by a single rogue trader by the name of Nick Leeson. So, let's explore how a 28-year-old from Hertfordshire was able to single-handedly destroy an institution.
You are watching Cold Fusion TV.
Nick Leeson was born in Wardford, Hertfordshire, to a middle-class home. He was a confident but unimpressive student. Despite his average educational performance, he was eventually able to secure a job with Morgan Stanley. He worked in their futures and options department, giving support to the traders on the front line. In 1989, 2 years after starting with Morgan Stanley, Nick Leeson approached his supervisor and asked to be promoted. Leeson wanted to be a trader, and he felt that he deserved the promotion. Unfortunately, his manager didn't agree, and the request was turned down. But Leeson knew what he wanted, and, subsequently, he quit Morgan Stanley. On his quest to become a stock trader, he would come across Barings Bank and send in his application. Apparently, he'd never heard of the bank before submitting the application.
At that stage, I probably would be happy to say that I'd never heard of Barings.
But it was a famous old bank.
So, there's no Barings in Watford.
Barings was no ordinary bank. It catered to the most affluent class of people. In the banking industry, the Barings name was respected. It was the safest of all banks, and they could raise capital very easily. Though, behind the scenes, its operations were struggling to keep up with the modern banking world. Leeson described the securities trading department of Barings as being in stark contrast to modern banks like Morgan Stanley.
Just a totally different environment. There was, at Morgan Stanley, everything was new. All of the equipment was new, the furniture was new. At Barings, everything is, just tacky, I suppose. I can't describe it any other way.
From his position as one of the bank's bookkeepers, it didn't take him very long to find flaws in how the bank operated. Barings Bank was crumbling during a time when most other financial institutions were thriving. Feeding on the good standing that comes with 2 centuries of global trading, it would survive though, much like it always had. But what Barings wouldn't survive would be hiring Nick Leeson. While many in the industry, including Leeson, possessed the intelligence to succeed, Leeson also had a confidence and a way with people that he would wield like a secret weapon. He was charming, friendly, and personable to his colleagues, but not just for the sake of being polite. He saw his co-workers not as potential companions, but rather a means to an end. Despite working at banks for multiple years, he never considered his co-workers his friends. He did not like them, he did not respect them, but he knew that sometimes he needed them to get what he wanted.
It's very easy for me to get on with people, but I don't necessarily have to like you or any of the people that I work with to get on with them. So I come in, I do my job, I do it to the best of my ability, and then at the end of the day, if you're going to ask me out for a drink, I'm not going to go out for a drink with you, because I don't like you.
Nick Leeson impressed his superiors at Barings with his keen eye for identifying and solving issues within the bank. Not long into his employment, he was sent overseas to chase down massive sums of money. These were debts that were long overdue but never followed up on. Barings Bank had a habit of making deals that would fall between the cracks, and it was Nick Leeson's fresh eyes that would hunt down these deals and claim back what the bank was owed. Leeson managed to find close to £100 million, the equivalent of twice of that today when factoring inflation. He describes this kind of mismanagement as being fairly typical for Barings. Things were looking good for Leeson. He was impressing his employees, and while in Jakarta, he met a fellow Barings staff member by the name of Lisa Sims. For the first time in his career, he found a colleague that he genuinely liked, and in 1992, the two of them married. That same month, his years of hard work finally paid off when Barings offered him the position of a trader. He would be in charge of a newly founded futures division in Singapore. This was the opportunity that Leeson had been waiting for, and quite possibly the worst decision that Barings had ever made. Approved to trade in Singapore, and having convinced his wife Lisa to move, it was go time. Trading primarily on the Nikkei, Japan's top 225 company stock index, Nick thoroughly enjoyed the stress and pressure of futures trading, essentially betting on if the price would rise or fall. If the market went the way he predicted, he made money. If not, he rapidly lost money. He was confident in himself and beloved by his staff. But later that year, the market began fluctuating violently, and Leeson's team started making mistakes. These bad bets were adding up, and if they weren't rectified, Barings stood to lose large sums of money. Out of the fear of losing the job that he worked so hard to obtain, and fueled by his own self-confidence, Nick decided to hide the losing bets from his employers back home. In order to do this, he altered the software of a separate hidden account so that his bosses in England couldn't keep track. He named this account the 5/8 account. So Leeson kept his losing trades active, but hidden. He assumed that inevitably he'd be able to cancel out the losses with future wins. But there was only one problem with this: margin payments. While the losing trades remained open, payments still had to be made in order to keep the trades going. He was going to need external funding. He just needed enough money to keep the failed trades going, and when the market turned around, he'd be home free. Leeson would hide his mistakes, and then when the market went his way, he would fix his mistakes in private. Nick had to keep digging into a deeper pit of lies. His bosses over in England could never find out what happened. He asked his superiors for funds to cover stock futures that he'd bought for clients, only this time, the clients didn't exist. Trusting that Leeson had the bank's best interests in mind, the branch over in England happily sent him ever-increasing amounts of money without ever thinking to double-check where the money was actually going. Surprisingly, for a time, the system worked. Leeson described living with the lies as easy after the first 2 days.
From the first time that I do anything, I'm not expecting to survive anything more than 2 days. To me, it's obvious. If they can't see it after 2 days, then who says they're going to see it after 200 days, 500 days, 1,000 days? You don't get confident, but you're getting away with it.
As Nick Leeson continued to cover up his trading mistakes, Barings itself was making massive losses, and that was just the amount they knew about. Something had to be done, so they recruited Peter Norris. He was to oversee operations. From the moment he began looking at the bank's records, Norris was shocked at what he found. The books were a mess.
How shocked were you by the lack of control in that when you got in there and began to work there?
I was shocked because I didn't feel that it should have been allowed to reach that point.
He saw a bank on the brink of collapse, with ever-increasing debt and a loose grip on its standing as a powerful player in the financial world. He brought in a team to clean up the mess. But the dire situation that shocked Norris was merely a fraction of the problem. He was yet to find the hidden account in Singapore that would eventually collapse the entire bank. Meanwhile, Leeson's plan to gradually cover his losses and emerge victorious had not gone to plan. By the end of 1992, his losses had only grown, now amounting to £4 million. Seeing no way out, there was only one thing to do: gamble even harder. Going against the bank's rules, he bought hundreds of additional futures in hopes of covering his losses. He bought so many orders that if the market was to move in his favour, it would completely wipe out his debt. He believed he could make his money back without anyone ever finding out what he had done. At this point, he was struggling to sleep at night. But surprisingly, it worked. By July of 1993, he had covered his losses. Leeson described the past 9 months as a living nightmare, but he had done it and come out relatively unscathed. Unfortunately for all involved, Leeson had not learned his lesson. In fact, what he had learned was how to commit fraud and get away with it. Rather than take away a valuable lesson in risk management,